She was humiliated and targeted by a group of wealthy passengers simply because of her skin color. But shortly after the plane landed, those very individuals found themselves at the center of an investigation that revealed their darkest secrets. What happened on that flight not only changed her life forever but also delivered a profound lesson no one could forget. Before we begin, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you love inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. The announcement echoed through the speakers at Washington, D.C.'s Dulles International Airport, calm yet clear. Atlantic Airways Flight 179 to Atlanta, Georgia, will begin boarding in 30 minutes. Please proceed to complete your boarding process. Amara adjusted her fitted blazer, which she had paired with an elegant high-collared ivory blouse. Her high-waisted black trousers not only allowed her to move freely, but also showcased a professional style while maintaining comfort, should she need to act quickly. Blending seamlessly into the crowd, she appeared like any other passenger. Yet her sharp eyes, always scanning for minute details, revealed she wasn't just any traveler. As she made her way down the terminal, joining the line to board the plane, she couldn't help but notice a group of white men standing near the first-class boarding gate. Middle-aged, dressed in striking red blazers, each wore bright red caps embroidered with bold white letters MAGA Make America Great Again. Amara felt their glances graze over her. One of them, a tall man with a slight paunch and a self-satisfied smirk, leaned in to whisper something to the man next to him. They chuckled softly, and although Amara couldn't make out the words, she knew without a doubt that she was the subject of their conversation. Settling into her window seat in the economy cabin, Amara placed her backpack under the seat in front of her and unzipped it to double-check her important materials. Notes from the FBI's D.C. office were carefully tucked into a hidden compartment, alongside her encrypted phone. This flight wasn't just a routine journey. Amara was heading to Atlanta for a crucial meeting with the FBI field office there. This mission revolved around a group of influential businessmen tied to politics and finance suspected to be at the heart of a transnational network of money laundering and human trafficking. And by sheer coincidence, the MAGA hat-wearing men she spotted at the boarding gate were her primary targets. The cabin gradually filled up. Amara slipped on her headphones and turned on a light jazz playlist, trying to relax while waiting for takeoff. But despite her attempt to tune out, she couldn't ignore the commotion coming from the first-class cabin, where the MAGA group was already causing a stir. A harsh voice echoed from the front. "I specifically asked for an imported red wine, not this cheap garbage." Amara turned her head to look. Paul Hargrove, the middle-aged man who had caught her attention at the gate, was standing up, loudly berating a young flight attendant. The attendant tried to maintain a professional smile, but the discomfort on her face was unmistakable. "Sir, I deeply apologize for the inconvenience. I'll check on this right away," the attendant said, doing her best to remain calm. "Check what? Do you think this is some lousy bar on a back street somewhere? I paid for first-class service, and I expect first-class service." Paul's voice grew louder, prompting a few nearby passengers to glance over. Amara sighed softly, turning her gaze back to the window. She had seen this kind of behavior too many times, powerful men wielding their status to intimidate and demean others, especially those they looked down on. The plane finally began taxiing down the runway. Amara closed her eyes, trying to relax, but Paul's voice, along with the chatter of the MAGA businessmen in first class, continued to carry through the cabin. "It's ridiculous," another man in the group said, his voice deep and gravelly. "These days, just about anyone can get on a plane. I swear, security is laxer than ever." Paul laughed loudly and chimed in. "Exactly. They have no idea who might be bringing what on board. I mean, just look at some of the people back in coach. You never know who might be hiding something in their backpack." Amara opened her eyes, sensing their gazes drifting toward her from the front of the cabin. While they didn't call her out by name, she knew without a doubt that their words were meant for her. She bit her lip gently, silently reminding herself to stay calm. A part of her wanted to stand up and confront them directly, but her professional training and survival instincts kept her grounded. "Don't let them drag you down to their level," she told herself. The cabin began to quiet as a flight attendant announced the plane had reached cruising altitude. Another attendant wheeled the beverage cart down the aisle, stopping briefly at each row. As the cart passed Amara's seat, Linda Worthington, a white woman in her 60s wearing a black dress and a red MAGA hat, turned to look at Amara. "Isn't it strange how just anyone can sit here these days?" Linda muttered, her voice loud enough for Amara to hear. Amara turned, locking eyes with Linda but saying nothing. Linda smirked, as if daring her to respond. Just a few minutes later, Paul Hargrove and his group began speaking even louder. I wonder why we don't have higher standards when screening plane tickets. I mean, sometimes being cautious can save lives. One of the men in the group nodded and replied, Exactly. Not everyone is trustworthy. Just look around, I'm sure someone's hiding something. Amara gripped the armrest of her seat tightly. She felt as though her entire body was pinned down by their scrutinizing stares. A few passengers seated nearby glanced at her awkwardly, their expressions a mix of discomfort and unease, but no one spoke up in her defense. Amara lowered her head, trying to keep her composure. She knew she couldn't overreact. Any action she took could jeopardize her undercover mission. But deep down, she had a sinking feeling this wouldn't be the last time she'd have to face them. And the insults she endured now were only the beginning of a series of dangerous events waiting for her after the plane landed. The steady hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, but the atmosphere inside had grown stifling and tense. Amara tried to remain calm, her gaze fixed on the small screen in front of her as she pretended to watch a movie while her headphones played soft jazz. Yet, she couldn't ignore the snickers and snide remarks echoing from the first-class cabin, where the MAGA businessman sat. She really does look suspicious, Paul Hargrove said loudly, ensuring the entire cabin could hear him. He no longer made any effort to keep his remarks discreet. I don't understand how people like that can just move around so freely. Who knows what she's carrying in that backpack of hers? A few passengers turned their heads to glance at Amara, their eyes a mix of curiosity, unease, and for some, quiet agreement with Paul. Others quickly looked away, as if afraid to be dragged into the simmering confrontation. Amara could feel every single gaze. She sighed quietly to herself. No one's going to say anything, she thought. It didn't surprise her, but it still weighed heavily on her. The young flight attendant walked up to the first-class cabin, trying to maintain a polite smile as she cleared away empty cups and wine glasses. Linda Worthington, the woman in the MAGA hat whom Amara had noticed earlier, suddenly turned and pointed toward her, her shrill voice cutting through the air. Excuse me, miss. Do you check the background of everyone on this plane? I don't feel safe with people who look strange like that sitting on the same flight. Linda's words brought the entire cabin to a hush. Amara lifted her head, her eyes locking directly with Linda's. The woman's sharp and mocking tone rang out again. She seems very mysterious, don't you think? Who knows what she might be up to? The young flight attendant flinched, looking flustered. Ma'am, all passengers have been thoroughly screened before boarding. I can assure you that. Assure me of what? Linda interrupted, her voice growing louder. This isn't personal, but if you don't do something, I'll speak to the captain myself. Amara felt her blood rushing to her head. She knew Linda wasn't just talking about her as a passenger. This was a veiled attack on her skin color. She gripped the armrest tightly, trying to stay calm, but every word Linda spoke felt like a knife cutting into her pride. Slowly, Amara removed her headphones, lifted her head, and spoke in a low but firm voice. Ma'am, I don't think you have the right to judge anyone based solely on their appearance. The entire cabin seemed to freeze. Linda stared at Amara, her expression full of defiance. Oh, so now you're going to tell me what I should or shouldn't do, Linda said with a mocking laugh. We're just trying to keep everyone safe here. Don't you think we have the right to ask questions? Amara met Linda's gaze head-on, refusing to look away. I think your rights stop where they begin to bother others and spread prejudice, she replied, her voice cold but composed. A few passengers around them began whispering to one another, but no one intervened. They just sat quietly, watching the confrontation escalate. A young woman seated 2 rows ahead lowered her head as if she wanted to say something but hesitated. Linda turned her head toward Paul Hargrove and his group, seemingly seeking their support. Paul smirked and shook his head, adding smugly, She reminds me of the kind of people who are always demanding their so-called rights but never take responsibility for the problems they cause. Paul's words hit Amara like a cold slap. She knew she couldn't let them continue pushing, but she also couldn't afford to jeopardize her undercover mission. Before things could escalate further, the voice of the captain came over the plane's intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain David Harris. We've received a report of an issue in the passenger cabin. The head flight attendant will address it shortly. We ask for your cooperation and for everyone to remain orderly to ensure the safety of this flight." The head flight attendant, a composed, middle-aged woman with an air of authority, arrived quickly. Her voice was calm but commanding as she addressed Linda. "Ma'am," she said, "all passengers on this flight have been thoroughly screened prior to boarding. I ask that you please return to your seat and remain calm." Linda, still clearly dissatisfied, folded her arms across her chest and reluctantly returned to her seat. But not before muttering loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Ridiculous. This is exactly why America is going downhill." Amara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew the situation wasn't over yet, but at least she hadn't let Linda and her group completely control the narrative. A few passengers began whispering to one another. A man seated in the row ahead of Amara shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable that people like that exist. They don't understand anything." The young woman sitting nearby gently touched Amara's shoulder and whispered, "You handled that really well. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I didn't want to get involved." Amara gave her a small smile and nodded in acknowledgement. She didn't blame the woman. Not everyone had the courage to speak up, especially when faced with people like Linda or Paul. But deep in her heart, Amara knew this was only the beginning. She could sense that the MAGA group wasn't just a bunch of arrogant racists. There was something bigger hiding beneath their actions, something far more dangerous, and she wasn't going to let it slide without doing something about it. Amara gazed quietly out of the window, silently reminding herself that her most important mission wasn't simply to shield herself from their insults, but to uncover the truth lurking behind this group of powerful businessmen. If you found this part of the story intriguing and meaningful, please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to the channel. It's the best gift you can give us, motivating us to continue bringing you even more engaging stories. Let's move forward together and uncover the thrilling developments in the next chapter. The soft hum of the airplane's engines pierced through the night sky, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained thick and heavy, weighed down by the tension left from the earlier confrontation. Although the head flight attendant had stepped in and urged everyone to remain calm, the MAGA businessman occasionally glanced in Amara's direction, murmuring just loud enough for her to hear. Amara worked to maintain her focus. She opened her bag and pulled out a small notebook, pretending to jot down a few notes. In reality, she was using a pen equipped with a hidden camera to record the group's provocative behavior. As an FBI agent, Amara never allowed herself to be caught off guard, even if she couldn't react like an ordinary passenger would. Linda Worthington, the MAGA woman with elaborately curled blonde hair, sat with her legs crossed but kept sneaking glances at Amara. After a while, she turned to Paul Hargrove, seated next to her, and spoke loudly enough for several rows of passengers to hear. "What do you think she does for a living?" "Definitely not a lawyer. Probably one of those types living off government handouts." Paul smirked and raised his glass of red wine. "She looks like the kind of person who blames the system for everything. It's exhausting having to share space with people like that. We work hard, build this country, and they just tear it down." Amara heard every word, but she kept her face completely neutral. Years of experience as an agent had taught her how to suppress her emotions, even when her insides were burning with anger. She looked down at her notebook, pretending to jot something down, but her hand gripped the pen so tightly her fingers trembled slightly. In the back, some passengers began whispering among themselves. An older woman leaned toward her husband and murmured, "They're being absolutely awful. That young woman hasn't done a thing." The young man who had earlier tried to stand up for Amara glanced down at his phone, his expression a mixture of frustration and helplessness. He seemed like he wanted to speak up again, but fear held him back. Not long after, a young flight attendant accidentally spilled a bit of juice on Linda's tray table while serving drinks. Linda reacted as though she had been gravely insulted. "What on earth are you doing? This is first class. I paid a lot of money for proper service." The flight attendant, her face flushed red with embarrassment, immediately bent down to apologize and clean up the mess. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll take care of this right away." But Linda wasn't about to let it go. She turned her gaze directly toward Amara, seated a few rows away, and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "See, this is the problem. From the flight attendants to the passengers, the standards just keep getting worse. Nowadays, anyone is allowed in here, even people who clearly don't belong." Amara lifted her head and met Linda's gaze head-on. But before she could say anything, a deep voice from a nearby row cut through the tension. It was the young man. The flight attendant already apologized. There's no need to blow this out of proportion. Linda whipped her head around to glare at him. And who do you think you are? This is none of your business. I'm just stating the truth. The young man sighed and turned back to face forward, clearly unwilling to escalate the argument. Linda smirked, her expression one of triumph, before shifting her attention back to Amara with a smug, satisfied look. Amara took a deep breath, fighting to suppress the fury rising in her chest. Linda and her group weren't just targeting her, they were deliberately trying to make her the center of negative attention in the cabin. The other passengers might not have said anything, but their glances, curious, sympathetic, or awkward, made Amara feel isolated. She locked eyes with Linda and spoke, her voice firm and loud enough for those nearby to hear. If you feel inconvenienced, I suggest you focus on the actual issue rather than criticizing people who have nothing to do with it. The flight attendant already apologized, and I would hope you're mature enough to accept her apology. The entire cabin fell silent for a few seconds. Linda opened her mouth to respond, but the firm and calm tone of Amara's words made her hesitate. Paul, sitting next to Linda, jumped in with a sarcastic tone. You seem to have quite a way with words. But that doesn't change the facts. We're just trying to ensure the safety of this flight. You understand that, don't you? Amara gave a faint, cold smile. Safety doesn't begin with judging others based on their skin color or background, sir. If you're truly concerned about safety, perhaps you should start by reflecting on yourself first. Paul smirked, but a flicker of irritation crossed his face. A few passengers in the cabin nodded subtly, as if they agreed with Amara but didn't dare to speak up openly. As the tension reached a boiling point, a voice rang out from the front of the cabin. Captain David Harris, a middle-aged man with a stern yet composed demeanor, stepped out of the cockpit. His eyes scanned the cabin, pausing briefly on the MAGA group before shifting to Amara. We've received reports of disruptive behavior on this flight, the captain said, his voice clear but measured. I ask that all passengers remain calm and cooperate to ensure the safety of this flight. Linda immediately turned to him, her shrill voice cutting through the air. We're not being disruptive. She's the problem. She jabbed her finger in Amara's direction, her hostility fully exposed. Amara rose from her seat, her gaze steady as she looked directly at the captain. Sir, she said, her voice calm yet commanding, I've done nothing wrong. I'm simply defending myself against remarks that are both insulting and discriminatory. The captain nodded, his expression unchanged. He turned to Linda and the MAGA group, his tone becoming firmer. I've made it clear that all passengers on this flight have been thoroughly screened. If you continue to cause a disturbance or insult others, we will have no choice but to report you upon landing. Linda's mouth hung open, but no words came out. Paul tried to mask his frustration by taking a sip of his wine. The captain returned to the cockpit, leaving the cabin in a tense, uneasy silence. Amara sat back down, exhaling deeply. The confrontation was temporarily over, but she knew this wasn't the end. Linda, Paul, and the MAGA group were clearly not the type to back down easily, and Amara had a gut feeling that things would escalate further once the plane landed. Looking out the window, Amara reminded herself this isn't just a flight. This is a battle, and I'm not backing down. The plane descended smoothly, preparing to land at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. But inside Amara's mind, everything was still a whirlwind. The events that had unfolded during the flight didn't just frustrate her, they made her think deeply about the prejudices that permeated her life, from her work to her day-to-day experiences. Thank you for flying with Atlantic Airways, the flight attendant's voice echoed over the intercom. We wish you a pleasant day. Amara grabbed her backpack, adjusted the straps, and stepped into the narrow aisle between the seats. She could feel the stares of Linda Worthington, Paul Hargrove, and the MAGA group lingering on her, but she didn't turn around. Just as Amara stepped through the plane's door and into the jet bridge, Paul's voice rang out behind her. Hey, miss. No need to rush. Maybe security should check your bag again. Who knows what's in there? Amara stopped, not turning back, but her grip on the backpack straps tightened. She held herself back with every ounce of self-control to avoid reacting. A few other passengers walking ahead of her glanced back briefly, then quickly looked away. Behind her, Linda snickered. These days, anyone can slip through the system. But we're not going to let that happen, are we? Amara turned around, her eyes cold and resolute. "If you have a problem with me, I suggest you say it clearly right now," she said, her voice low but sharp as a blade. Paul shrugged, his expression smug as ever. "Oh no, we're just talking about general safety. Don't take it the wrong way, Ms. Johnson." Hearing her name spoken in such a deliberately pointed way, Amara realized Paul must have noticed her information during the boarding process. The calculated malice in his tone only confirmed he was intentionally provoking her. The baggage claim area of Atlanta's bustling airport was filled with a cacophony of sounds, chatter from passengers, announcements over the loudspeakers, and the rumble of suitcases rolling across the floor. Amara stood quietly near the conveyor belt, her eyes following the stream of luggage as it glided past. Yet, the sense of being watched never left her. Not far away, Paul, Linda, and the rest of the MAGA group huddled together, whispering among themselves. Roger Hill, one of the men in the group, glanced at Amara before turning back to the others with a sly, mocking smile. Suddenly, Linda stepped closer to Amara, standing beside her as if she, too, were waiting for her luggage. "You seem very confident," Linda said, her tone light but dripping with condescension. "I suppose you're used to causing trouble for others." Amara turned her head, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I am. If you have something to say, I'm happy to listen. But if not, I suggest you focus on your luggage." Linda raised an eyebrow, her expression full of provocation. "Oh, I was just wondering. People like you, always demanding rights but never contributing. It's fascinating that we have to share space with people like that." Amara gave a cold, faint smile, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Ma'am, people like me work hard to be here, just like anyone else. If you see that as a problem, then perhaps the problem isn't with me, it's with you." Linda's face flushed red, and she opened her mouth to retort. But by now, some other passengers had started to take notice of their conversation. An older woman standing nearby shook her head, clearly displeased with Linda's behavior. As Amara lifted her suitcase off the carousel, a tall man in a dark blue airport security uniform approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a calm but firm voice. "We've received a report from a passenger that your luggage may require additional screening." Amara turned to look at the security officer, then glanced over her shoulder at the MAGA group. Linda stood with her arms crossed, a smug expression plastered across her face. Paul smirked, his lips curling into a mocking grin. Amara took a deep breath. She couldn't let this situation spiral out of control. She set her suitcase down and looked directly at the security officer. "No problem," she said, her voice firm but composed. "You're welcome to inspect it." The officer escorted Amara to a private screening area. She unzipped her suitcase, revealing nothing but clothes, a few personal items, and a small notebook. There was absolutely nothing suspicious. "My apologies for the inconvenience," the officer said after completing the inspection. "There's clearly nothing out of the ordinary here." Amara nodded and thanked him, but she knew full well this wasn't a coincidence. The MAGA group had intentionally filed a false report just to humiliate her. As Amara stepped out of the screening area, Linda and Paul were still standing nearby, as if waiting to see the outcome. "Oh, you got cleared," Paul said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Good to know the system's still working as it should, isn't it?" Amara stopped in her tracks, turning to face them directly. Her gaze locked onto Paul's, her eyes cold and sharp like a blade. "Sir, I do hope this isn't how you entertain yourself while waiting for your luggage." Paul smirked, but there was a flicker of irritation in his eyes. Linda chimed in, her fake smile still firmly in place. "We just wanted to make sure everyone stays safe. You don't think that's reasonable?" Amara tilted her head slightly, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Safety? I think what needs to be examined isn't my luggage, but the prejudices you're carrying around. That's the real threat here." Amara's words left Linda momentarily speechless. A few nearby passengers, including the older woman from earlier, nodded subtly in agreement. But Paul laughed, as if entirely unfazed. "You're quite something," Paul said. "But you know what? Words don't change the facts." Amara remained silent, not rising to the bait. She simply regarded him with a calm yet piercing gaze, as though memorizing every detail of his expression. Without another word, she turned and wheeled her suitcase out of the baggage claim area. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd have to deal with the MAGA group. But she also knew that no matter how powerful or arrogant they thought they were, truth and justice would always be her strongest weapons. Behind her, Linda and Paul remained where they were, but their expressions had shifted from smug self-satisfaction to a more cautious wariness. Amara could feel that they no longer saw her as just another passenger. To them, she was now a real threat to whatever it was they were trying to protect. Amara walked out of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, pulling her suitcase behind her without looking back, even though she knew Linda Worthington and Paul Hargrove's eyes were still fixed on her. Outside, the Atlanta sky was heavy and gray, mirroring the weight she felt after the tense and exhausting flight. It wasn't just the sting of their discriminatory words and actions that lingered. Amara now realized this went deeper than random harassment. Linda, Paul, and their MAGA group weren't merely petty provocateurs. They were deliberately trying to provoke her, and beyond that, they were clearly hiding something much larger. As Amara approached a line of waiting taxis, a driver, a middle-aged black man, smiled at her through the rearview mirror as she climbed in. "Where to, young lady?" Amara leaned back into the seat, closing her eyes for a moment as she took a deep breath to center herself. "The Peachtree Plaza Hotel, please." The drive was quiet, with Amara lost in her thoughts as the taxi wove through the crowded streets of downtown Atlanta. But as the cab turned onto a busy avenue near the city center, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw the name of her supervisor, David Carlson, from the FBI's Atlanta field office. "Johnson here," she answered, her voice steady and professional. Amara Carlson's voice came through, tinged with concern. "Are you okay? I just got a rather strange report." Amara frowned, her eyes flashing with sharp alertness. "What kind of report, sir?" "We received information from airport security that a group of passengers intentionally accused you of carrying suspicious luggage. They also questioned whether you're a legitimate citizen. I assume those passengers are the same targets we've been tracking." Amara tightened her grip on the phone, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, they harassed me the entire flight. But this isn't random. I think they've figured something out about me." Carlson paused for a moment before responding, his tone lower and more serious. "Amara, you need to be careful. These people aren't just ordinary businessmen. They're using their influence to protect a network we've been investigating. And I'm confident they won't stop at harassment. We need to stay ahead of them." As the taxi pulled up to the Peachtree Plaza Hotel, one of Atlanta's most upscale establishments, Amara quickly paid the fare and stepped inside. Her luggage was taken upstairs by a bellhop, but she barely noticed the opulent surroundings. Carlson's warning kept replaying in her head. Since leaving the airport, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that someone was watching her. Once inside her room, Amara locked the door and drew the curtains shut. She opened her backpack, quickly checking her vital documents and her encrypted laptop. The USB drive she had prepped was still there, containing critical information about the MAGA group that she planned to present to Carlson during their meeting the next morning. She dropped into a chair, her eyes fixed on the laptop screen, and began drafting a summary report about the events on the flight. But halfway through typing, her phone buzzed again. The screen displayed a message from an unknown number. "I think you're safe, Agent Johnson. We know who you are. This is just the beginning." Amara stared at the message, her breathing slow and deliberate. This wasn't the first time she had been threatened, but the timing of this message was too precise to ignore. She immediately launched her phone's security software, trying to trace the number. However, it had been expertly encrypted, leaving her unable to pinpoint the sender right away. Her frown deepened as she stood up and walked to the window. From the 20th floor of the hotel, she could see the bustling streets of Atlanta below, glowing with lights and activity. Yet she found nothing out of the ordinary. Under her breath, she muttered, "All right, if this is how you want to play, I'm not backing down." That evening, Amara decided to head down to the hotel bar, hoping to unwind and observe her surroundings. She ordered a sparkling water with a slice of lemon and sat in a corner of the bar, strategically positioned to have a clear view of everyone entering and leaving. And before long, the MAGA group walked in, instantly making the previously quiet bar buzz with their loud voices. Paul Hargrove, Linda Worthington, and two others in their group, Roger Hill and Jack Montgomery, settled at a table in the center of the room, laughing and talking as though they owned the place. Linda was the first to spot Amara. Her gaze lit up with a mix of curiosity and challenge. She nudged Paul and said something in a low voice. Paul glanced up, and his eyes locked onto Amara's. Amara didn't look away. She met their stares with calm resolve, her expression unyielding. Paul smirked, then stood up, picking up his glass of red wine as he made his way toward the bar where Amara sat. "Miss Johnson," he said, his tone laced with hidden intent. "What a delightful coincidence. I didn't think I'd run into you again so soon." Amara's gaze stayed steady. She didn't respond immediately, letting a few seconds of silence stretch between them before replying. "It seems more like you're following me than running into me by chance." Paul chuckled, setting his wineglass down on the bar. "Following you? Hardly. But I must admit, you do make me curious. A black woman traveling alone and carrying herself with such confidence. It makes me wonder, what are you hiding in that backpack of yours?" Amara took a slow sip of her sparkling water, her expression unwavering. "You're trying to provoke me, but to what end, Mr. Hargrove? If you have something to say, I suggest you stop dancing around it and say it plainly." Paul's smirk faded, replaced by a sharp, cold glint in his eyes. "You shouldn't stick your nose where it doesn't belong, Johnson. Consider this your final warning. If you don't back off, we won't hesitate to take action." Amara raised an eyebrow, a frosty smile forming on her lips. "Mr. Hargrove, if you think your threats are going to scare me, then you clearly don't know anything about me. But I do appreciate you giving me even more reason to dig into your business." Paul clenched his jaw, but before he could say anything further, Amara stood, her calm demeanor cutting through his growing frustration. She left the bar without another word, leaving Paul standing there, visibly agitated yet powerless to stop her. Back in her room, Amara felt as though she had just endured a small psychological battle. But she also knew this was only the beginning. Linda, Paul, and their MAGA group weren't just arrogant businessmen, they were hiding something far more dangerous. And Amara wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. Sitting down at her desk, she opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys as she began pulling up her files. Tonight, her strategy shifted. She wouldn't just defend herself anymore, she was going on the offensive. The next morning, Atlanta's bright sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains, but Amara had no time to bask in the rare sense of peace it offered. She had stayed up all night preparing her materials, reviewing everything she knew about the MAGA group and their connections. They weren't just arrogant businessmen with red hats, they were part of a powerful network with covert operations the FBI had been tracking for months. Amara took the last sip of her coffee, set the mug down on the desk, and tucked her laptop into her backpack. Before leaving the room, she quickly checked her phone for messages. Supervisor Carlson had sent her the location of the meeting, a secure FBI field office in downtown Atlanta. As she exited the hotel, the lingering sense of unease from the previous night clung to her. The MAGA group weren't the type to back down after what had happened at the bar. But that only fueled her determination to push forward. When Amara arrived at the FBI office, Supervisor Carlson was already waiting with two other agents, Mark Evans and Lisa Chang. The room was small but equipped with everything they needed: a whiteboard covered with notes and connection diagrams, and a large screen displaying documents under analysis. Carlson looked up as Amara entered and gave her a small nod. "Johnson, you're right on time. Take a seat, we need to dive in immediately." Amara placed her backpack on the table, pulled out her laptop, and connected it to the large screen. She began presenting everything she had observed and recorded about the MAGA group since the flight. "This is what I've gathered so far," Amara said, pointing to a photo of Paul Hargrove on the screen. Paul Hargrove is a wealthy financier, but he's also under investigation for involvement in suspicious cross-border transactions. Linda Worthington, on the other hand, is one of the most prominent political lobbyists, frequently donating to campaigns that protect her corporate interests. As for the other two, Roger Hill and Jack Montgomery, they're businessmen, but evidence suggests they have ties to extremist groups funding illicit activities, including money laundering. Carlson furrowed his brow, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. "The problem is, we don't have enough evidence to indict them. What we have so far is circumstantial and based on leaked intel. But if they've figured out that you're an FBI agent, the situation could escalate quickly." Amara nodded. They didn't just recognize me, they deliberately provoked and threatened me. The message I received last night was a clear warning that they won't leave me alone. But that also means they're worried we're getting closer to the truth." Mark Evans, a seasoned agent with extensive experience in complex cases, spoke up. "So what's our next move? We can't just sit here and wait for them to make the next move." Amara turned to him, her voice steady. "I think we need to push them harder. They're already on edge, and if we apply pressure in the right places, we might force them to make a mistake. They're protecting something big, and the more we close in, the more likely they are to slip up. Lisa Chang, who had been quietly reviewing the intel on her tablet, chimed in. We could also leverage what we know about their network. If we disrupt their operations even slightly, it might trigger a reaction. That reaction could give us what we need to connect them to larger criminal activities. Carlson nodded thoughtfully, his gaze shifting between the agents. Good. Evans and Chang, I want you two to focus on analyzing their financial transactions. Dig deeper into the accounts we flagged last week. Johnson, he said, turning to Amara, you're our eyes on the ground. Keep tracking their movements and interactions, but stay under the radar. If they know you're onto them, they won't hesitate to retaliate. Amara's jaw tightened, but she nodded firmly. Understood. Carlson's tone softened slightly. And Johnson, stay safe. These people play dirty, and they're not afraid to get their hands bloody to protect their empire. Amara met his gaze with quiet resolve. I won't let them intimidate me, sir. We've come too far to back down now. As the meeting wrapped up, Amara packed up her laptop and notes, her mind already racing with the next steps. She had no illusions about the danger ahead, but she also knew that exposing the truth was worth the risk. Stepping out of the field office into the bustling streets of Atlanta, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was a fight for justice. And Amara wasn't about to lose. Lisa Chang nodded in agreement. They're the type of people who won't hesitate to use their wealth and influence to crush any threat. That's exactly why we need to be careful. Even the smallest mistake could let them walk free. Carlson turned to Amara. Johnson, you've had close contact with them. If you feel safe enough, I want you to continue monitoring them and gathering intel. We'll increase surveillance around you to ensure your safety. This is the point where we can't afford to back down. Amara didn't hesitate. I'm ready. That evening, Amara received word from Carlson that the MAGA group would be attending a high-profile charity gala at an exclusive club for Atlanta's elite. The event was being held under the guise of raising money for underprivileged children, but the FBI suspected it was a front for covert transactions, dirty money being laundered as legitimate donations. Amara wore a sleek black evening gown, paired with simple high heels. It wasn't her usual style, but the mission required her to blend seamlessly into the wealthy crowd. She concealed a small earpiece, linked to agents Mark Evans and Lisa Chang, who would be stationed outside, ready to assist if needed. As Amara entered the opulent grand hall of the club, she immediately spotted Paul Hargrove's group at the center of the room. Paul held a glass of champagne, deep in conversation with a few middle-aged men in tailored suits. Linda Worthington was laughing loudly, gesturing with her wine glass as she spoke with a cluster of older women dripping in expensive jewelry. Amara moved gracefully through the room, keeping her demeanor composed, careful not to draw attention too quickly. But within minutes, Linda noticed her. With a sly smile curling on her lips, Linda weaved through the crowd, heading straight for Amara. Well, look who we have here, Linda said, her voice soft but laced with mockery. Ms. Johnson, we didn't expect to see you in a place like this. Amara gave her a faint smile, maintaining a polite but guarded tone. Good evening, Mrs. Worthington. I could say the same about you. Linda narrowed her eyes slightly, as though trying to decipher why Amara was there. But before she could press further, Paul Hargrove joined them, champagne flute still in hand. Ms. Johnson, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I didn't realize you had a taste for these high-end events. Or are you perhaps looking for something intriguing? Amara smiled faintly, her gaze steady and sharp. Perhaps I'm just curious about the people I meet during my travels. It's fascinating how paths cross in unexpected ways, isn't it? Paul chuckled softly, but his eyes betrayed a hint of unease. Well, life is full of surprises, he said, raising his glass slightly. Though I imagine a woman like you must have very specific interests. Amara tilted her head, her voice calm but deliberate. And I imagine a man like you must have many secrets worth keeping. But of course we're all here for charity tonight, aren't we? Paul's smirk faltered briefly, but he quickly recovered. Linda, however, looked visibly annoyed, her gaze darting between Amara and Paul. Charity, Linda repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. Some people have a way of turning everything into an opportunity, don't they? Amara met Linda's glare without flinching. That's true, Amara said evenly. But the real question is opportunity for what? Before Linda could retort, a loud chime echoed through the room, signaling the start of the evening's formal program. Guests began to move toward the ballroom, where a stage had been set up for speeches and an auction. Linda shot Amara one last look, her lips pressed into a tight line, before turning and walking away with Paul. Amara watched them disappear into the crowd, her instincts on high alert. Through her earpiece, Mark's voice came through softly. "Johnson, did you catch that? They're definitely on edge around you," Amara whispered under her breath, pretending to adjust an earring. "Yeah, they know I'm here for a reason. Keep eyes on the exits. If they try to slip away during the event, we need to know where they're going." "Understood," Mark replied. As Amara followed the crowd into the ballroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that the evening would bring more than just idle threats. She was walking into the lion's den, but she wasn't leaving without answers. Paul and Linda exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard by Amara's sharp response. Before they could react further, an older man, evidently a major sponsor of the event, approached, cutting into the conversation. "Paul, Linda. Come over here, we need to discuss your latest contribution," he said enthusiastically. Linda flashed a polite smile, but as she turned to leave, she leaned in close to Amara and whispered, "Don't wander too far, Ms. Johnson." "We're not done here." Amara remained still, her sharp gaze tracking Linda and Paul as they walked away. The encounter, brief as it was, confirmed something important: they were keeping a much closer eye on her than she had anticipated. Scanning the room, Amara knew she wasn't there just to observe. This gala was her opportunity to get closer to the truth, but it also came with the looming threat of being exposed. She lifted her hand to her earpiece and whispered, "Mark, Lisa, I need their location at all times. Let me know if anything unusual happens." "Got it," Mark's voice came through steadily. Amara tightened her grip on the glass in her hand, bracing herself for what lay ahead. The battle between her and the MAGA group had officially escalated to a more dangerous phase, but she was also closer than ever to uncovering the truth. The charity gala continued in a whirlwind of glitz and glamour, but for Amara it felt more like a theatrical charade. Behind the fake smiles and polite handshakes, she could sense the underlying scheming and danger that she was determined to expose. Moving gracefully through the crowd with her glass of sparkling water, Amara kept her ears attuned to every word coming through her earpiece. Mark Evans and Lisa Chang, stationed outside, relayed updates in calm, measured tones. "Amara, Linda Worthington just entered a private room with Paul Hargrove and a few others. We suspect they're holding a closed-door meeting," Mark reported. Amara froze momentarily, her eyes darting toward the hallway leading to the private rooms. From her position, she could see a tall, burly security guard stationed outside one of the doors. It was obvious Linda, Paul, and the group didn't want to be disturbed. "Lisa, can you hack into the club's camera system?" Amara murmured quietly into her earpiece. "Working on it," Lisa replied briskly. "Give me 2 minutes." While waiting, Amara decided to take a more hands-on approach. She moved closer to the hallway leading to the private rooms, maintaining her composure as she sipped her drink. As she approached the security guard, she accidentally spilled her glass of water on the floor, some of it splashing near his shoes. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," Amara exclaimed, bending down as though flustered. She pulled a napkin from her clutch to dab at the spill. The guard frowned but didn't say anything, stepping back slightly to avoid the puddle. "Ma'am, this area is off limits," he said gruffly, his eyes scanning her for any signs of suspicion. "Oh, of course," Amara said with an apologetic smile, standing up. "I just got turned around trying to find the restroom. Thank you for letting me know." She made a show of retreating back toward the main room but positioned herself near enough to keep an eye on the hallway without drawing attention. "Lisa, what's the status on the cameras?" she whispered. "I'm in," Lisa responded after a brief pause. "I've got eyes on the room. There are 6 people inside, including Linda and Paul. They're gathered around a table looking at what appears to be documents or some kind of map. Audio isn't available yet, but I'm working on it." "Good," Amara replied. "Keep me updated." As she waited, Amara leaned casually against a nearby column, pretending to scroll through her phone. But her focus was razor-sharp, her senses heightened. She knew she was walking a fine line. One wrong move could blow her cover. Mark's voice came through suddenly. "Heads up. Roger Hill just left the room and is heading your way. He's moving toward the main hall. Keep your distance." Amara turned slightly, catching sight of Roger out of the corner of her eye. He was moving briskly, his expression tense. She ducked behind a group of guests, blending into the crowd as she observed his movements. "Lisa, any progress on the audio feed?" Amara asked. "Almost there," Lisa replied. "Give me 30 seconds. Roger disappeared into the crowd, but Amara didn't follow. Instead, she remained in position, knowing that the real action was still happening in that private room. Moments later, Lisa's voice came through again. "Got it. I'm patching the audio feed through now." A faint crackling noise filled Amara's earpiece before the conversation inside the room became clear. "This deal needs to be finalized tonight," Paul's voice said, his tone firm. "We can't afford any delays. If this falls through, it won't just be our money on the line, it'll be everything." Linda's voice followed, sharp and commanding. "Agreed. But we need to make sure no one's watching. That woman, Johnson, she's trouble. I want her out of the picture." Amara's jaw tightened. They were talking about her, and their operation was clearly more dangerous than she had initially thought. Taking a deep breath, she whispered into her earpiece, "Lisa, Mark, keep recording everything. We're going to need this." "Understood," Mark replied. Amara straightened her posture and stepped back into the flow of the party, her expression calm and composed. She knew she had just uncovered a critical piece of the puzzle, but the night was far from over, and the stakes were getting higher by the second. "Oh, I'm so clumsy," she said with a soft smile, crouching down as if she were cleaning the floor. The guard frowned at her, but before he could react, Amara swiftly planted a tiny listening device along the edge of the nearby doorframe. "All set," she whispered into her earpiece as she walked out of the hallway. "Amara, I've hacked into the camera system," Lisa's voice came through. "There are 4 people in the room, including Linda and Paul. They're talking to another man who isn't on our radar. I'm sending his image to your system now." Amara quickly opened her phone and saw the image Lisa had sent. The unfamiliar man was someone she didn't recognize, but the FBI database could help identify him. "Mark, Lisa, I need this man's identity right away," Amara said. "He could be a critical link in their operation." Through the listening device Amara had planted on the door, Linda Worthington's voice came through loud and clear in her earpiece. "We can't let her keep going. She's gotten too close to what we're doing." Paul Hargrove's voice followed, colder and more calculated. "If she's an FBI agent, we need to act immediately. But whatever we do, it has to be discreet. I don't want this damaging our reputation." The unknown man spoke next, his voice deep and authoritative. "Don't worry. I'll take care of my part. But you both need to make sure there's no trace leading back to us." Amara frowned, her heart beating faster. It was clear they were planning something against her. She decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to act before the MAGA group could execute their plan. She signaled Mark and Lisa through her earpiece. "Lisa, send the info on the unknown man to Carlson and request an ID from HQ. I'm going in directly." "Amara, are you sure?" Mark's voice was laced with concern. "This is their turf. If they catch you, we won't be able to extract you in time." "I don't have another option," Amara replied firmly. "They're too close to making their move, and if I don't act now, we'll lose our chance to dismantle their network." Amara made her way back to the hallway. The guard was still stationed there, his posture rigid as he scanned the area. This time, Amara decided to take a bolder approach. She walked up to him, flashing a friendly smile. "Excuse me, I think I may have left my wallet in there. Could you let me in to grab it?" The guard frowned, but before he could deny her request, Amara pulled out a fake employee ID card, an emergency prop issued by the FBI for undercover agents. "I'm Mrs. Worthington's assistant," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "She'll be furious if I don't retrieve her belongings." The guard hesitated, glancing between Amara and the ID. After a moment of consideration, he sighed, shrugged, and stepped aside to let her through.